everyone. First, I'd like to thank FreeMind for the opportunity to speak to you today. So the mission of CEPI is to prevent future epidemics and pandemics with a focus on vaccine preparedness. CEPI was established in early 2017 in response to the outbreaks of Ebola in West Africa that had occurred a few years prior. And from that experience, the world recognized that there was a need for a new mechanism to support vaccines against well-known viruses that emerge periodically to cause outbreaks when there is no commercial market. Then we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which illustrated the challenges of responding to an unknown emerging viral threat that could ultimately wreak havoc at a global scale. So this morning, I'm going to speak a bit about CEPI's strategy for pandemic and epidemic preparedness, and I'll talk about our active funding opportunities to advance this strategy. One of the lessons from the COVID-19 experience is that speed is absolutely critical. So the very first COVID vaccines to be authorized were developed in record time, clocking in just under 1 year. And just by comparison, historically, vaccines have taken 10 or more years to develop. But even with those record-breaking timelines, they came on the scene too late to prevent COVID from having global spread, from causing 68 million cases by the time those vaccines came along. And there were, of course, trillions of dollars of damage caused by this virus. And the virus was able to evolve quite dramatically, which created the challenge of trying to chase after the variants and have well-matched vaccine strains. But just imagine if we could accelerate vaccine development dramatically, even beyond those year-long timelines. What if we could have a vaccine within 100 days of a recognized outbreak? And you can see in the case of the epidemiology of COVID-19 that you could actually intervene before the curve really starts to dramatically shoot up. And there's a potential, if you could intervene at this time with a vaccine, along with other non-medical countermeasures such as masks, that you could prevent an outbreak from spreading into a global pandemic. So based on the COVID experience, CEPI has laid out our moonshot, the 100 Days mission, which has the goal of having vaccines that are ready for initial regulatory authorization and manufacturing scale-up within 100 days of recognition of an outbreak. This vision has caught on and adopted by G7 and G20 countries, as well as many other organizations. Implicit in the 100 Days mission is equitable access. Even if you had a great vaccine that came on board within 100 days, if you can't get it to the populations that need it, you're not going to be able to have an impact. So equitable access takes into account cost, the qualities of a vaccine, such as thermostability, how easily a vaccine can be manufactured at the scale that is needed, and some other factors that I'll talk about in a few minutes. So 100 days is a pretty dramatic acceleration in vaccines. So how do you do it? And we've been inspired by examples in very disparate fields. And one example of this is Formula One racing. So back in the 1950s, it took about a minute to complete a pit stop. But now it can be done in 2 seconds. And you can Google this and look at YouTube videos, and it's quite dramatic to see the 2 pit stops being filmed in parallel. So how is this possible in the Formula One pit stop example? Well, the first part was preparedness. All the components, all the tools, all the people that were needed to make this happen were pre-positioned. They were in place, they were ready to go as soon as the car rolled in. And the second part of this is practice. So the whole process was optimized so that there were no white spaces in the action, and the team practiced until this was absolutely seamless. A third piece here is technology innovations that allowed for a very rapid response. And important to note that with all of these innovations, that there was no impact or no negative impact on safety. And in fact, doing these pit stops now is much safer than it was back in the 1950s. So interestingly, a lot of these same lessons can apply to vaccine development. How can you dramatically accelerate it? It's really critical to focus on preparedness, and this really requires a paradigm shift in how we think about response to viral outbreaks. So similarly to the Formula One pit stop example, this requires getting all of the pieces in place, all of the tools that you need to develop and test a vaccine and have those ready to go for when you need it, having all the people, experts, the organizations that have vaccine platforms, that have those capabilities that are also prepared for an outbreak scenario. And then the third piece is technology innovations. So about a little over a year ago, CEPI launched a broad call for proposals for innovations to prepare for future epidemics and pandemics. And this is intended to work a bit like the US government BAAs, in that focus areas can be added or subtracted or modified depending on the needs of what's happening in the world, or where our portfolio is progressing. We currently have 2 different focus areas that are active at this time. The first one, focus area 1, is to advance innovative rapid response vaccine platforms. The second focus area is to use promising platforms to develop vaccine candidates against viruses that are already known to cause periodic outbreaks, or exemplars from viral families that could pose a threat for spillover into human populations. And I'll talk about each one of these focus areas in a little more detail. So for the first focus area on developing innovative rapid response vaccine platforms, this shows some of the characteristics that we're looking for in this type of technology. So we want platforms that can enable you to develop a vaccine, ideally in super optimized conditions up to within 100 days, and that would confer a rapid onset of protection, a very strong immune response. From an access perspective, there are multiple different dimensions to access. We'd love to have a one-and-done regimen where you have a vaccine that is resistant to variants, that can be delivered in a single shot. And that would also, with the ease of administration, that would allow this to be administered in places that have very minimal healthcare infrastructure. The cost of goods is also critical. Ideally, we'd like to have vaccines that are just a few dollars a dose so that everyone can afford them. Thermostability, as we saw during the COVID-19 epidemic, is a big factor that many places can't really accommodate standard cold chains. But when you're dealing with vaccines that require ultra cold storage at minus 80 degrees, that creates really great hurdles. And if you think about the mRNA platforms that are fantastic from a speed perspective, that it's really a struggle. We have hurdles now from an access perspective because those first generation vaccines had challenges in thermostability and also high cost of goods. We want to make sure that vaccines are going to be safe for vulnerable populations, and also that they have a fairly simple manufacturing process so they can be rapidly scaled up, particularly if we have a potential pandemic that would require vaccines to be administered at a global scale. We have 2 different flavors of awards under Focus Area 1, both aimed at gathering proof of concept data on your vaccine platform or potential platform. we have, most of our CEPI awards in the technology space have been up to $5 million. And typically can go through phase 1 proof of concept studies and can have a duration of about 3 years. We recently recognized that there are many promising innovations that aren't yet at the point of being eligible for these awards, because we typically want to see that there's some good immunogenicity data to be competitive. So, for example, immunogenicity in a rodent model. So we introduced exploratory awards, which you can consider as a sort of get-ready step. These can support studies to fill in data gaps. Maybe you haven't worked with infectious disease indications before, but have technology that could be useful for other indications. This could be an opportunity to try this for a vaccine-type indication. And these exploratory awards are up to $1 million. They can support studies for up to 18 months. We have a very rapid turnaround, very short application, just 5 pages. And we review these exploratory applications monthly with the cycle starts on the second Monday of each month. Those larger awards up to $5 million, the platform development awards, we review quarterly, and it's the second Monday of each quarter. In terms of the types of studies that we support under these platform awards, the goal, as I mentioned, is to demonstrate proof of concept. And so you want to design a study that allows you to test the promise of your technology while trying to reduce all other variables, including variables around the virus itself. So we typically recommend that you develop kind of a test case vaccine candidate that's that's designed against a virus that's well characterized, ideally would have some licensed vaccines you could use as comparators, correlates of protection as well, so that when you do your studies preclinically and clinically, you could have confidence that what you're seeing is likely to predict good efficacy in the clinic. And we have a list of examples here. So turning our attention to the second focus area on developing vaccine candidates, in this case, our focus is very different. It's about developing products, or at least some candidates that have gone through advanced preclinical and early clinical development, and for viruses that are potential threats for the future. And this virus list tends to evolve over time. We have just one of our priority viruses, Lassa fever, on the list right now. We have a handful of other priority pathogens. These are known viruses that pose periodic outbreaks, but we have fairly full portfolios for some of these others at the moment. And then you can see we have about a half dozen viral families. And there we have a lot of flexibility in which particular virus you could use as an example. So the concept here is similar to what we learned during COVID, that research on SARS-CoV-1 and MERS ended up being incredibly helpful when there was a new coronavirus that emerged. You could use the lessons in vaccine design and apply that to an unknown virus. For focus area 2, vaccine development, we have 3 different types of awards. Similar to what I showed you for the platforms, we have an exploratory option. In the case of vaccine development, this is sort of your vaccine discovery stage. This is when you start designing your candidate and do some initial studies. That's, again, up to $1 million. You can then go on to preclinical development, which is all of your preclinical proof of concept studies, and then clinical development, which can cover phase 1 through 3, and will also fund clinical trial material production. And you could come in at any point here. You don't have to begin at the exploratory stage, but it offers flexibility to bring in projects that could be at a variety of different entry points. These undergo quarterly reviews, and so that the next deadline will be in April. So you may be listening to this and so far thinking, well, you know, this sounds good, but what's the catch? What does CEPI want out of this? as you can surmise from being at this event, where we don't take an equity stake, we also don't touch awardee IP that is generated during the course of CEPI funding. What we care about is equitable access, in line with our interest in making products that can be beneficial to the general public. And equitable access means different things at different stages, different levels of investment. There's a lot of flexibility here. I talked a lot about awards. They're 1 million or up to 5 million. They can be preclinical stage. And for this level of investment, what we really are interested in is the data. So kind of similar to US government funding and NIH funding, if you have experience with that, we want to make sure that the data is eventually published after you've protected your IP. And CEPI is certainly interested in seeing the data, and that may help us be able to determine whether we want to make additional funding investments in your technology or your development effort. Once you get into larger investments at the clinical stage, we ask for a bit more in addition to the data access. Here, our interest is that platforms can eventually be used in the case of an outbreak, and they can be used to develop products that can be broadly accessible. In the case of those vaccine candidates, it's about making those products ultimately accessible if there's a great need for them, and that you have a sustainable business case that gives us confidence that you will be able to deliver if there is a future emergency situation. Now, I've laid out what we're interested in. This doesn't translate necessarily to very specific contract language. We recognize that the different organizations have very different business models, and so we will work very closely with you to negotiate contract terms that will work for both CEPI and be aligned with your business model. And I should say that beyond the funding piece, there are a lot of other benefits to partnering with CEPI. We are well positioned within the vaccine and global health ecosystem, and this puts us in a position to be able to support matchmaking and to connect our awardees with other key stakeholders and partners, whether that be R&D and manufacturing partners or organizations that will be involved in procurement, regulatory organizations. We have a great relationship with those, and particularly deep knowledge and experience in the regulatory pathways in LMIC markets. We have a close relationship with the WHO and a good understanding of their pre-qualification requirements. We also have an increasingly growing collection of enabling science resources. So we're developing or have developed assays, antibody standards, animal models for testing vaccine candidates against our viruses of high interest. We're developing clinical trial networks in Africa. So there are many different ways. I should also mention we're soon to be setting up an adjuvant library that we invite our awardees to screen to try to find a better adjuvant to improve the immune response of their vaccine candidates. And we're well connected with global scale manufacturing organizations. We are building a manufacturing network that has capabilities across all the different modalities of vaccine types. So if anything I've said here has piqued your interest, I would encourage you to take a look first at our call for proposals, and the QR code will take you to our call for proposals page, or else you can just look up CEPI.net and pull down the menu on how to partner with CEPI, and you'll get to our page on calls for proposals. And similar to other speakers you've heard from today, it really helps to talk to CEPI's staff scientist prior to taking the time to develop a proposal. And I have an email address here that will send an inquiry to my team. It can move things along a little faster if you can attach a non-confidential slide deck that provides an overview of your technology or your product. And you'll have an opportunity to get feedback from the team on whether this looks like that might be within the scope of the call and of interest to CEPI, and we may follow up with a non-confidential tech talk, that we call it, which would give you an opportunity to make your pitch to our group of scientists and get feedback on how to best structure your application to have the best probability of success. So I will stop there. I'm happy to take questions.
During the first pandemic, we ran into glass vial shortages. Is your program addressing the availability of glass vials for billions of doses in the manufacturing side?
Yes, this was something that during COVID-19 that CEPI did have a program to try to create this marketplace, essentially kind of matchmaking of and keeping an eye out for where groups may have availability of materials such as vials and connecting those to the developers that needed them. At the moment, we aren't continuing to build that. I'm not sure if that continues to be active, but certainly in emergency situations, we'd probably return to that model. But for the current calls for proposals, that's not been a focus, but we could certainly make connections to manufacturing groups that can provide those kinds of services.
There's limited glass manufacturers.
Yeah.
Are you also considering, within your scope, different vaccine delivery technologies?
To some extent, but we tend not to fund those delivery technologies as standalone projects. They need to be combined with a vaccine candidate. And we're looking not specifically for alternative delivery, but also it helps to have other advantages from an access perspective. For example, if a delivery technology confers thermostability on the vaccine, that would be something of interest. And we have supported some microarray patch technologies under a thermostability program in the past. So that would definitely be something you can take a look and see if that might fit within our current focus area. Most likely you would need an innovative platform in addition.
Hi, I'm here.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. I was also wondering, would you be considering enabling technologies for vaccine manufacturing and characterization?
Yes, so there are periodically calls for proposals in this area. One area that we're quite interested in is analytical innovations, so innovative release assays and quality assays that will dramatically accelerate the manufacturing process. We have had calls for proposals for manufacturing innovations that can otherwise improve speed or can reduce costs, increase scale, but most of those right now are not active. But even if you see that there's not a good fit for our call for proposals, you still feel free to reach out to us. It's always helpful for us to understand the landscape, and what we learn may inform future funding opportunities.
Does CEPI consider non-vaccine modalities that still have the ability to rapidly respond to pandemic threats?
Yeah, we have taken a look beyond vaccines, but have come to the conclusion that there is a lot to do. So right now, therapeutics is outside of our scope, and even non-vaccine focused prophylactic technologies are generally out of scope for us, just because there is so much to do in vaccines. But we are keeping an eye on other kind of prophylactic approaches beyond vaccines in case that changes in the future.
Hi, would you consider funding human challenge trials as part of the proof of concept, for considering speed is one of your key goals there?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that's something we would consider on a case-by-case basis. We actually are setting up human challenge models for COVID-19 for some of the newly emerging variants. And so that is of interest. I think it depends. I think in general, we want to be focused on critical path activities in our vaccine development awards, but it's something that we'd be happy to discuss.
Hi. Can non-US companies get funded by CEPI and work with CEPI?
Oh, yes. We're a global organization. We're funded by countries around the world. We have a global focus, so there's no restriction on countries that can apply, although I should say with the caveat, there are some countries that some of our major funders preclude us from doing business with, and that can be a limiting factor. But I think North Korea, Iran, those countries as examples. All right, thank you very much.